Conversation has rules. We all know this intuitively, even if we haven't studied the psychology of group dynamics and discourse. And all but the most socially challenged of us intuitively know what the rules are, because we act them out every time we enter a conversation, whether it be with 1, 2, or 10 people in a group. The rules of discourse are a bit like punctuation in writing or a referee in sports. When everyone is following the rules and doing their job, no one notices the rules are there. But we know when someone messes up, interrupting others, dominating the conversation, speaking out of turn. All of these are examples of conversational miscues. It's much more apparent at those moments that far more than verbal information is being exchanged in a conversation. And understanding the rules of conversation, and the breaching of them, can help us writers to craft dialogue that characterizes our speakers as polite, arrogant, aggressive, passive, etc. Think of this brief lesson as a lesson in meta-conversation, the things that don't get said that say a lot. So let's get to the rules. Narrative theorist David Herman outlines 3 major rules for conversation based on a large body of research in the field of sociolinguistics. These rules cover social behavior that exists in parallel with the information conveyed by the conversations themselves. And the rules are things like who speaks, for how long, about what, and then who speaks next, and so on. In a fictional dialogue, readers will pick up on these social cues implicitly if they're not directly written into the text, and explicitly when they are. The rules are simple and you know them already. Let's examine them one by one. Adjacency pairs. If we think of a conversation a bit like a game, ping pong might be an apt analogy. One person begins a conversation by making a statement or asking a question. This begins the game. Everything that follows is a response to the initial statement, which is returned in kind. If you approached me on the street and said, "Some fine day we're having, Ro," you'd think it was a bit odd if I responded with something like, "The insular caribou have stopped breeding altogether." You'd think, damn, that was random. What the hell's up with Ro? Because conversation is like a game of ping pong. Serve yields return, which yields volley, and so forth until the point is over. You say something about the weather and expect something somewhat related to the weather in return. This signals that we're playing the same game. Anything else is a deviation from the socially expected norm. That's rule 1. Incidentally, this is one of the reasons why expository dialogue can seem so off-putting to some readers. The content of the conversation doesn't seem to be an organic back and forth between 2 participants playing the same game. Instead, it seems like the author is putting words in the mouths of the players to feed information to the reader. Turn-taking. If we continue with our analogy, you might think of the first serve of the ping pong ball as an invitation to return the ball. It's very similar with an overture in a conversation. "That shirt looks great on you, Chris. Where'd you get it?" is an invitation for Chris to say something like, "Thanks, Ro, I got it at J.C. Penney, half price, can you believe it?" And, depending on the context, I'd continue the conversation by offering a related comment or question until the conversation petered out. But did you notice that each of these statements ended with a question? Those are specific cues inviting the other speaker to take a turn in the conversation. Herman points out that the speaking role in a conversation is a shared commodity. How participants share this commodity reflects on the social standing of the conversation's participants. At some point during the conversation, participants are invited to take the floor and speak for a time, while others are expected to foster the conversation by listening and then responding appropriately when their turn to take the floor comes. Failure to adhere to these conventions may reflect negatively on the perception of an individual's sociability. For example, a conversation hog or a persistent interrupter might be viewed negatively by the participants who fail to get a word in edgewise or are continuously interrupted. However, a speaker who holds the floor and commands the attention of all the participants by paying off their patience with interesting stories or funny anecdotes may very well raise their esteem despite monopolizing the discourse. The important feature of turn-taking and floor-taking is that speaking time is a shared commodity, and the participants in a conversation will judge each other based on how they share that commodity. Topic shifts. Lastly, Herman highlights the collective consent of the group in deciding which topics to discuss. Like turn-taking, the topic of a conversation is a group effort. Participants tacitly agree to discuss a topic, and when this topic shifts, the participants must tacitly agree to shift topics. Participants in a conversation may find it annoying if another person insists on discussing a topic the other participants would prefer to avoid, or they may resent an attempt to change topics when the other participants are still enjoying the current topic. You might picture a group of friends happily discussing the wedding of a colleague when one member of a group attempts to shift the topic to politics against everyone else's wishes. This is unlikely to go over well. These rules, of course, are not quite that simple. In real life, these rules are destined to shift their already fuzzy boundaries depending on the size of the group engaged in the conversation, as well as the participants in it. A charismatic wealthy couple who charm everyone they meet at a Tony charity function may create resentment if they attempted to behave the same way at a family dinner or a church social. All these conventions are highly context dependent. They are, however, useful tools to help the fiction writer convey unspoken social information that gets exchanged between characters in some dialogues. We'll look at a couple examples to show how these rules of conversation can play out on the page. The first one you might remember from our lessons on dialogue. "You want to come for a ride?" he said. Connie smirked and let her hair fall loose over one shoulder. "Don't you like my car? New paint job," he said. "Hey!" "What?" "You're cute." She pretended to fidget, chasing flies away from the door. "Don't you believe me or what?" he said. "Look, I don't even know who you are," Connie said in disgust. This first example from Joyce Carol Oates involves a conversation of two participants, one aggressively seeking the other's participation, and the other looking for a way out. The man begins the conversation by asking a direct question. It's an opening that invites a response from Connie, and by neglecting to take the floor, she's sending a clear message. "No, I don't want to come for a ride. I don't even want to be talking to you." The man responds to her social slight by pressing the point, highlighting his status and by pointing out that he has a car and that it's a nice car too. And sensing this is going nowhere, he decides to shift the topic, directly signaling his interest in her by calling her cute. This shift is even less welcome. Again, she ignores the invitation to take a turn in the conversation, focusing on the flies rather than on him or his interest with her. When he presses the issue again, she responds with a firm rebuke. "I don't even know who you are." More information gets exchanged here in reading the metatextual cues of this conversation. She's uncomfortable, fidgeting, refusing to answer or participate in the conversation. He's pressing her for attention. The words getting passed between these two convey far less information than the character's behavior surrounding the words. This is where an implicit understanding of the rules of conversation helps your reader to read the situation as the author intends, as an unwanted and uncomfortable overture by a creepy guy. Let's consider an entirely different type of conversation. This comes from the opening pages of Susan Peribaud's short story, Some Say the World. The three participants in this conversation are a middle-aged mother, her 18-year-old pyromaniac daughter, who is also the character narrator, and the stepfather, Mr. Arnett, to whom the mother is being unfaithful. Mom has been pretending to take a poetry class at a community college as a ruse to see her lover. Watch how what's not being said overshadows the actual words exchanged. When she comes in the door a little after 9, she sets her clearly untouched poetry book on the end table next to where I am on the couch. "How was it?" Mr. Arnett asks, smacking his gum and not looking up from the board. "Oh my mother said. "You wouldn't believe the things those people wrote then." "Who'd you do tonight?" I ask her. It is a game that I've worked up. Sometimes I suspect that Mr. Arnett is playing it as well, but other times I think he's just being duped by her. "What's that?" my mother asks, separating the lashes over one eye, which could have been caked with sweat-soaked mascara. "Who'd you do tonight?" I put a cigarette in my mouth, wait for one of them to light it. "Oh, Browning," my mother says. "Which one?" Mr. Arnett asks. He looks up at me, not her, then takes the lighter from his shirt pocket and snaps on the flame in front of my face, so close I could reach out and swallow it. "Which one?" she asks. "Which Browning?" Mr. Arnett says. The lighter disappears back into his shirt. My mother misses a beat and then says, "All of them." She hovers over the Parcheesi board, feigning interest in the game, and her mink stole knocks one of my pieces to the floor. Mr. Arnett makes a disgusted sigh, although it was him, I know, who bought her the thing. She pats my head. "About your bedtime," she says, as if I am 12 and have to get up early to catch the school bus, not 18 and drugged beyond understanding anything much more difficult than Parcheesi and knowing that my mother, at 40, is sneaking around in motel rooms. It's clear from the way the mother behaves that there's something off here. The stepfather and the daughter are both adhering to the normal rules of discourse, while the mother isn't quite playing along. She clearly has something else on her mind, and she's not a particularly good liar either. The daughter challenges her mother by asking specifically which poet they talked about in her class. "Who'd you do tonight?" with a little double entendre thrown in for good measure. And the mother pretends to be distracted. "What's that?" The daughter could easily let her off the hook with a typically teenage eye roll and a never mind, but she doesn't. She repeats, "Who'd you do tonight?" And you can see how the daughter and stepfather are insisting upon adhering to the normal rules of discourse. They won't allow her to shift topics, which one Mr. Arnett asks her twice. And after she misses a beat, she's forced to respond with a poorly considered lie. All of them. Exposing the obvious. Neither the daughter nor the stepfather is inclined to let her shift the topic or avoid a turn, even though she'd very much like to. Then, after that obviously ridiculous response, the mother absent-mindedly knocks over the game piece, which a reader could realistically interpret as an act of protest, as if to say, "Let it go, you guys," before saying directly to the daughter, "About your bedtime." This entire conversation could fall neatly under the elephant in the room type of subtext, but it isn't just what's not being said. Much of what is being avoided is revealed through the daughter and stepfather using the conventional rules of conversation to poke at the mother's obvious deception. It isn't merely subtext here, but a metatextual battle on the three participants' behavior. The daughter deliberately takes the floor so that she can put her mother on the floor, to answer direct questions she won't have answers to. It's also fitting that the daughter and Mr. Arnett are together, playing their own game, and Mr. Arnett plays along with the daughter's second game, but only to a point. He's not willing to say, "We both know you don't know anything about either of the Brownings, dear. Where were you tonight?" When characters breach or attempt to breach the rules of conversation, that means something. Even beyond what lies between the lines in a dialogue, readers can make inferences about characters by how those characters behave in response to the rules of discourse. This is yet another element of a story's subtext that can bear important information that never directly makes it to the page. What does it say about a character when they won't answer a direct question, or shift the topic rather suddenly, or take the floor only to put another character on the spot? All of these metatextual cues are going to say something to your reader, even if you can't point to a single word in the text that proves it. Subtext is the realm of inferences, where a good portion of the fiction lies.